him and my daughter are just escape artists. That's kind of why we have this.
Imagine a child locked up in a makeshift prison cell inside of his own home for 6 years. Feces-covered walls, a dirty couch, no way out. This is the horrifying reality uncovered in Nevada, where parents Jeffery and Misty Scanlan pleaded guilty to child neglect. But their punishment, their sentence, will shock you. I am going to break down the details of this horrifying case for you right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. What an update in a case that still makes no sense. And when you hear the official sentence for the husband and wife who locked up their 11-year-old autistic son inside of a makeshift prison cell in their own home for 6 years, because that's what the allegations were, I think you may also be asking, how does any of that make sense? I think that is a fair argument when we talk about what the sentence was here. So we have Jeffery Scanlan and Misty Scanlan of Henderson, Nevada, and they pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of child neglect, and they each were sentenced to just 1 year of probation. Yeah, no jail time, no prison time. So the judge in this case determined that the couple was at a low risk of reoffending, which contributed to her decision not to impose an incarceration penalty. This is according to the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And we'll get more into the legal underpinnings of that, but I have to first get you up to speed in case you're not familiar with this case. And a fair warning, this is beyond disturbing. This all came to light back in April of last year when an officer visited the Scanlan home after their children hadn't shown up for school. And what this officer discovered was horrifying. You have an 11-year-old boy with severe autism apparently locked up in a metal barred enclosure described as, quote, similar in appearance to a jail cell, or similar to a jail cell. And that, by the way, is basically the wording from the incident report in this case. Now, the 11-year-old, who we're not identifying, lives with severe autism spectrum disorder. According to his parents, he is strong, he can be destructive, and so the idea was they needed to manage his behavior. And the Scanlans decided that the way to do that was to build what was described as a makeshift cage in their living room. And they kept him confined in this area for much of the last 6 years. But they didn't build it themselves. No, apparently someone actually professionally constructed that for them. Listen to this.
When did you have this installed then?
A few years ago. It was probably 6 years ago.
Oh, wow, okay. So he was strong at a young age.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Please, buddy. It's just part of his stimming. He just,
oh, yeah.
You know.
That's, yeah, I get it.
So the officer on site reported hearing screaming and banging inside the home, but apparently no one answered the door for about 40 minutes. When Jeffery Scanlan finally opened the door, he claimed the children had been sick.
So,
hey, buddy.
We had to do this because it keeps him from kicking holes everywhere in the house.
Does he have, like, he doesn't hit his head on the walls or anything like that?
No.
Okay. How about the other children then that are supposed to be in school?
Yeah, they're upstairs.
Be able to get them down here?
Yeah, he's
very strong.
He just turned 11, but he's super strong. Yeah, I mean, he's ripped off cabinets, kicked holes. His room upstairs, he kicked a hole all the way through into my bedroom.
Okay.
It's just
Okay.
So to keep him from destroying the house, we try to keep him in here.
He doesn't know how to unlock?
No.
Wow.
Well, on this one, we had to tie this up, and then on the other door we have a key lock.
Okay.
So.
Because I mean, some of them are very observant.
And
dude,
they
smart. Smart
they
in ways
are,
that we don't expect sometimes.
Oh, they're so sharp. Him and my daughter, they're both autistic. So
my concern as a safety officer is what happens in case of a fire.
That can be cut right there. It's just tied up. So that door opens right up. And the other one has a lock key.
So he could open it and yank it?
No, it's just tied up right now. It's just tied up.
Right.
But, I mean, technically,
okay,
it opens right up.
Okay.
Yeah, they were concerned about that when they installed it.
Yeah. And that's what we're looking for is the safety of the situation.
By the way, thank you for coming to us as we cover these kinds of stories. We really, really appreciate it. And look, I also want to send a shout out and thank you to our great partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, because it's with their support that helps us to keep on doing this. Now, this is America's largest injury law firm, a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they have so many? Because they win a lot. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash victim in Florida, $5.6 million for another car accident victim in Atlanta, and not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them a mere $5,000 in that case. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. Now, according to the incident report, inside, officers found a large enclosure with metal bars and a locked door. And inside that enclosure was the 11-year-old boy, wearing only a diaper, sitting on a dirty couch. The enclosure was covered in feces on the floor and walls. Misty Scanlan arrives back home later on. First responders are eventually able to get the 11-year-old out of the house to get him checked out. And Misty apparently later told police more about why their child was being kept inside this cell. And she apparently told police that the enclosure had been installed about 5 years earlier to keep their son safe.
So talk to me about this gate that's in the living room. My understanding is that you guys use that for...
He's a runner. Anytime we had the door open, he's taken off maybe about 4 or 5 times.
When was the last time that happened?
It's been a while.
So when did you guys put this gate in there?
They installed it 5 years ago.
5 years ago?
Now, notably, she also later admitted to police that she had stopped cleaning the enclosure 3 weeks earlier, saying that she just got extremely busy. So the Scanlans had 4 children in total, the 11-year-old boy, an 8-year-old daughter who also apparently has autism, and 2 other sons, so ages 14 and 16. And the 16-year-old hadn't been attending school. The 14-year-old was allegedly doing online school, though the parents admitted they weren't sure how much work he was actually completing. And the incident report says that he was marked as a no-show from the school that he was attending, the Nevada Learning Academy. And then Jeffery Scanlan told police more about how they were keeping their children's behavior in check.
And how do you guys kind of deal with him when he's in that way?
We try to distract him. Sometimes give him a popsicle, things like that. Just try to kind of take his mind off of when he gets upset and he can't, because he gets upset and he, bites his hand or he kicks the walls or kicks the gate. He just, and we just try to take him out of that, by distracting him or, sometimes eventually just giving him what he wants.
Okay. Outside of, obviously, both of them are at school, are you receiving or going after any sort of other services? Does anyone come in home? Do you guys go anywhere for, like, behavioral therapy or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Have you guys tried any of that before? Or?
No, we haven't. Just, we were just kind of dealing and trying to just get through day-to-days, basically, I don't know. Haven't really... I mean, they give us some kind of suggestions, but it's like, I don't know I don't know where to start, basically.
Yeah. Okay. And has there been any sort of progress since he started school?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And talk to me a little bit about, so obviously there's feces, like, in his room and in the gate there. What's up with that?
Sometimes, he just has accidents. He'll wipe it on the wall. We try to clean it sometimes, and, when we see it, we try to clean it up. I mean, we've gone through tons of those Kleenex or the Clorox wipes.
Yeah. When was the last time you guys cleaned his gate area?
His gate area, it's been like 2-3 weeks.
Okay. What about his room?
His room, he hasn't really been staying much in it, so it's been a while.
Okay. And so obviously he sleeps mostly in the gate area.
Yeah,
it sounds like.
Room, yeah.
Is that why there's no, like, furniture or anything in his room, or?
Yeah, we took all the. He had a bed at one point. He had a dresser at one point, but he will I mean, he's so strong. Him and my daughter, they both of them, you know, they would turn their furniture over, stand it up. We were scared that they were going to break the windows out, so we just took all the furniture out, and you know.
Okay. And then, so she's not quite as forceful. She's still an escape artist.
Oh yeah. And she's still like strong.
So do you ever use like the gate for her?
We haven't, just because we were supposed to have the gate company come out and fix the bars, the ones that are broken. Like you've seen, there's pieces of plywood up there, just to keep him from getting out, because he would break the bars. And basically, he was able to sneak out. A lot smaller, so she can sneak right through those. So we haven't kept her in there just because, you know, the other bars won't keep her.
Okay. And is it the same? I saw room kind of had some feces too. Did she have kind of the same issue with the accidents?
Yeah. She sometimes, like, we'll put duct tape around her, like her pajamas, so she can't get into her diaper, because sometimes at night she'll get into her diaper and she'll
so she wears diapers. What about
yeah, he wears diapers too.
Okay, so they both wear diapers.
Yeah.
Now, the parents told police that they locked their daughter in her room at bedtime and then duct taped the top of her shirt to her diaper to prevent her from grabbing her feces. And when asked why they didn't seek help for their children, Jeffery Scanlan said they didn't know where to start, that they didn't want strangers in their house. This is all according to the police report. And before we go any further into this, I want to bring on criminal defense attorney Adrian Lobo, who is actually in Las Vegas, knows this law well. Adrian, thanks so much for taking the time to come on. Before we even get into the plea, before we even get into the sentence, the punishment here, just your thoughts on this, being from the community.
I mean, it is a pretty horrifying allegation to hear that a child was kept in a cage and that this cage had been in the home for 6 years. It is shocking for sure, and I think very shocking for the community. I can say in the Las Vegas area and the surrounding suburbs, this is a very nice area. I would say upper middle class, and you rarely, if any, hear anything happening over there at all.
And I think, you know, from a layman's perspective, you could say, oh my gosh, this looks like a clear-cut case of child abuse or endangerment or neglect. But from a legal standard, when they talk about the children being placed in these deplorable living conditions, how does that meet the legal standard under Nevada law of child neglect or abuse or endangerment?
Right. And I think it's important to look at this statute, like the deplorable living conditions, right? It's not enough to have a messy home. What would put your child's health and safety in jeopardy? It has to be rising to the level that it's going to cause them some sort of physical illness or mental sort of harm as well. And in this case, it appears at first glance that that would have been happening. Of course, one thing that's not captured in the police reports is we just have summaries, but we don't have the forensic interviews. The other thing that makes this very challenging too is two of the children, have some sort of communication issues. One, of course, being more severe than the other, which is, the young boy not being verbal at all. So to say to him or to have some sort of interview, it makes it very challenging and difficult. But one of the most, I think, compelling things is that the child was screaming or making some sort of sounds, rattling, the gates where he was being enclosed, because he clearly was in a state of not enjoying where he was at. And I would presume that it causes great mental harm, and especially with somebody who has that sort of disposition, right, to not be able to rationally understand it.
By the way, I was looking under Nevada law. The way that I see it is there's as we talk about a felony versus a misdemeanor, and correct me if I'm wrong, a felony would be if a parent willfully causes their child, who let's say is less than 18 years of age, to suffer unjustifiable physical pain or mental suffering as a result of abuse or neglect. A misdemeanor is a person who is responsible for the safety or welfare of a child and who permits or allows that child to suffer unjustifiable physical pain or mental suffering as a result of abuse or neglect. So in other words, a felony would be if you willfully do it, whereas a misdemeanor is you're creating a situation where it could happen. Am I understanding the difference there and why it may be important to keep that in mind with respect to this sentence? And we'll get to more of the sentence in a bit. But am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. It is more of the mental element, which is the intent behind the conduct. Whether it's intentional or whether it's negligent, is definitely the breaking point between a felony and a misdemeanor.
When you hear these parents apparently say, or at least the father, I didn't know where to start, I don't know where to get the appropriate services, I don't know how someone could have helped. On one hand, when I first heard this case, I said, that's not a defense. Then again, when I look at again, we will get more into the sentence and the plea, I'm thinking, is that a legitimate rationale here? Is there something to be said that the state doesn't offer the appropriate services that are easy for people to get or easy for people to find? What did you make of that?
It's interesting, right? Because I can see both sides of the argument like you. I think that on one hand, if I was the prosecutor, I would be very fixated on the fact that the 11-year-old who, is a severely autistic child, that he was at the variety school. So the parents had enough wherewithal to have the child enrolled in the proper school. And the school was giving out, of course, the referrals to the agencies. So we didn't know what to do. We're at our wits' end. I don't know how much I think that argument, holds water at the end of the day. The other thing is that they had somebody, a contractor, presumably, come into the home and install this sort of edifice in the area. And so if you've got the resources, right, which I would presume is at least like a few $1,000 to have it professionally done, that you don't know how to kind of get your child to the doctor or pay those few $1,000s, even if their insurance didn't cover it, to get them in with a specialist, to spend the money in that regard. So that's one side of it. The other side being, I think the stronger defense argument is that the parents have a duty to all of the children. And if one child is harming the other, I think there can be an argument, although I don't think it's very strong, that they were just at their wits' end. And if they're harming the other children, then what do the parents do at that point?
This is what's interesting about it, because there would be an argument, and again, we'll get into this more, particularly their attorney statements, but is there an argument to be made that these measures were necessary to protect the children, to protect others? Because if you're going to have somebody come in and install it, you have to wonder, is there a scenario where it's crazy I'm even saying it, but is there a scenario where it arguably could be justified, or maybe doesn't appear to be what it looks like on its face? On the face, when I described it, it sounds like cruel and unusual to a form of punishment to keep a child locked up like this. But is there a potential argument to make this was necessary?
Well, I think there is, and that wouldn't be really captured in the police report, right? That would be part of the defense's case preparation for trial. And as a defense attorney, something I would want to know about, from the parents is every single step that you chronologically took to seek help. And we don't know that because that would be privileged information. So, for example, the attorney in this case, he's a very good, well-respected, aggressive attorney in our community. I could see Mr. Draskevich going through line by line or trying to figure out what they had done, possibly meeting with the prosecutor, letting the prosecutor know these are the steps that were taken. This is the resistance they met. Who knows what they did? That would not be captured. That's a proper conversation for their attorney, and whether the attorney discloses it to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor then makes a decision about, this is what a jury would hear. All the steps of how these people tried to get help and didn't, and this was the last resort. But I don't know that necessarily. I would hope that something like that took place, because otherwise the negotiation is very shocking. Let's
talk about it now, because let's get into this plea, and the deal that was taken, these two ended up taking, and the sentencing. So initially, it was our understanding, the Scanlans were facing felony charges of child abuse, neglect, or endangerment, but they ended up taking a plea deal where they only had to plead guilty to a misdemeanor charge of child neglect. And in the state of Nevada, a person convicted on these charges, our understanding, would be a Category B felony, meaning that this resulted in a child suffering physical pain or mental anguish. They could have faced anywhere from 2 to 20 years in prison, but when it's downgraded to a misdemeanor charge, that punishment reduces it up to 6 months? in jail, but that's not even what they received. Instead, the court imposed a 1-year probation, no jail time, and during sentencing, District Judge Jessica Peterson emphasized that the Scanlans were deemed a low risk of reoffending, which influenced the sentencing decision. And the judge noted that the couple had no prior criminal history, had shown remorse for their actions. But again, Adrian, I'm having difficulty understanding that. No incarceration time for what is quite a crime here.
I think it is shocking. I will say that it wasn't a misdemeanor, it was a gross misdemeanor. So in the state of Nevada, we have a felony, we have gross misdemeanors, and then the lowest being misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are punishable up to 6 months in county jail. A gross misdemeanor is punishable up to 1 year in county jail. And then the felony, as you said, is a B category felony, can either be a 1 to 6 or a 2 to 20, I believe. And so what they pled to was the middle charge. So it's not a misdemeanor in that sense. What I was more shocked about is that the 1 year probationary period. Now, a judge has authorization to have that probationary period for 3 years, right? And so that 3 years would have extended it. So at least there's some sort of supervision, over the children. That being said, that this is such and I think a very beneficial deal for the Scanlans that I'm not at all, surprised. And it makes me wonder if Judge Peterson was given kind of a conference with the prosecutor and the defense attorney, because this is the sort of thing that as a judge, you would be like, are you kidding me? Because the judge has the authority to, if you will, blow up the negotiation and say, I don't agree with this. I'm sending you to jail for this amount of time. And so if she was apprised of that and understood that, and yes, the low risk to reoffend, you have to come back as anything but high under the statute. So they had to pass a mental evaluation and a psychological examination to determine whether or not they were going to be somebody who is, going to, reoffend in the future. I think a large part is that they were compliant. They had, the child in the right school. And it seems as though, they complied with, all of law enforcement's questions, et cetera. And so that, it does give some credence to it, but it is quite shocking, especially for the 1 year supervision.
Does it make you think there would have been a weakness in the prosecution's case? Maybe they could improve. There was that willful element. Do you think that is maybe something to consider here?
I think so.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we're splitting hairs here, but that's what defense attorneys do, right? It's nuance in the situation. I think that the media, rightly has categorized it as a cage because that's what they see in the body cam footage and whatnot. I will say it's more like they put bars around like a family den area. And I don't think that really is going to, carry, the argument at the end of the day to say that it wasn't willful or it's not that inhumane. The fact is that you put bars up anywhere within the home to enclose a child or any sort of human that deserves basic decency is quite shocking. And I think that there must have been some sort of flaws that we don't necessarily know about. And as I spoke, it could be that, the defense attorneys went to, of course, the prosecutors and laid out everything that they had done, or they tried to get the, referrals, and they met with whatever resistance, but,
or it was just to spare the pain, the hardship of a trial, subjecting jurors to seeing feces-covered walls, pictures, video, documentation of what this child was going through, maybe the other children were going through. Is it that as well? Hey, if we can avoid a trial at all costs, let's try to do it.
Well, yeah, and I think a prosecutor in this sort of situation has a very delicate job to do. There are 4 children that are in the home. It appears that they're not being abused in the classic sense, like beaten, starved to death, something along those lines. So when CPS is called in, I think it's also important to note that it's not just law enforcement, it's CPS. And so they're not only going to be subjected to the criminal system, but also to the family court system in tandem. So they're going to have supervision on multiple fronts and have probably already completed, by the time this case hit the criminal system, they probably had already dealt with some of the ramifications that were occurring in family court. And so if they're being compliant, that bodes well for them too.
Talk to me about this. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reported that the prosecutors, talking about the prosecutors, they didn't even argue that these parents were high risk. They could have, right? Going back to your point about what probation should have looked like. Why do you think they didn't even argue that?
Well, it's not that they get to determine that. So it's a psychologist, right? That the state refers you to, that they get to determine it. And so everybody agrees that the child or the defendants would be evaluated by these people. And then everybody accepts that unless there's a reason to challenge it. So for example, the prosecutor is going to take it at, like, wait, they're not allowed to argue it. If the parents had come back as high risk to reoffend, the prosecutor, pursuant to the guilty plea agreement, would have regained the right to argue, meaning that the prosecutor, if they were high risk, could have argued for additional terms and could have argued for a year in jail.
By the way, I have to ask you this. Could CPS have intervened earlier to prevent this?
Right. I mean, that's the interesting part. And when you read the police report, CPS is saying that there were no prior contacts. They had not been called to the house before. And so I can tell you from a CPS perspective that goes in tandem with a criminal investigation, they 9 times out of 10 are always going to be looking at a history and if the parents are compliant. In this case, you've got 2 other children. Yes, they should be in school and attending school, but if they're not being, abused, malnourished, they're not in a position to really pull the other kids out. And they're always going to operate for what the best interests of the child are. I understand that the children went to live with a relative after this had happened and they were, in the relative's custody. There's a process, of course, to get them back home because the courts are going to look at it as those, like, we're going to try to give the family services. We're going to make sure they have the tools to be able to manage the children and then, go from there. And so in this situation, it's not surprising to see that, CPS didn't have any prior contacts. So it was deemed like, if you're compliant, we're going to work to help you and the kids and the family as a whole get to a place, where everybody is safe.
It's interesting you say that. 2 things about it. One, in a statement, Child Protective Services said the parents, quote, chose repeatedly to place their children into potentially dangerous situations and place the 2 children into deplorable living conditions that directly threatened harm to their health. While Jeffrey and Misty both indicated that they were doing what they could with the situation that was in front of them, it was clear based on their statements that Jeffrey and Misty had repeatedly failed to acquire or seek services for assistance with the struggles they experienced with their children. And, according to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, their attorney, who we've been talking about, Robert Draskevich, said that he believes this 11-year-old is currently in his client's custody, and that the Scanlans did the best they could with the tools at their disposal. Now, we couldn't independently confirm that, but is that true, that the parents would have their custody of their children after all this?
It could be, very much so. So, for example, I believe that this happened in April of last year. From what I read in just looking at the court docket, it appears that the case did not get to formal charging, if you will, until later in the summertime. And during those months period, even though the criminal case hasn't taken off, the CPS case is happening. And so the family services case will hit the ground faster and will be running. So it's not uncommon to see the criminal case kind of trailing behind. And by the time it takes off, the family has done all of the requirements and has shown to the Department of Family Services that they're in a place to be reunited with the children. Right. So that's why the probation conditions that Judge Peterson said is to further comply with any and all directives by the Department of Family Services, because 9 times out of 10, it wouldn't surprise me if the kids were already back because they had completed whatever requirements the department had ordered.
I mean, look, at the very least, we were just wishing them safe resolution, that their needs are being met, that they're okay, that they're safe, because it's a really harrowing situation. And I will tell you, the other defense attorney in this case, Michael Horvath, called this outcome, quote, a fair resolution. And he argued that the enclosure, as we've been talking about, their interpretation, it was not a cage, it was a safety measure, saying, quote, obviously the initial charges didn't really show what the underlying facts were. So you're seeing what many will look as a controversial decision in the end. But I think, Adrian, we kind of laid it out about what some of the challenges might have been for prosecutors, why we're seeing this resolution, what guided the judge's decision. But we are just hoping everybody moving forward is safe and healthy, because this is a really, really distressing situation, and hopefully a wake-up call both to these parents and any others in similar situations. Adrian Lobo, thank you so much for coming on, taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we get a chance to have you back on soon for a different case, Not this one is really something, to say the least.
Exactly. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.